one of the big issues at the moment is the intersect between climate and energy realism and freedom of speech. That means the ability to express how we feel in protest, in raising our voice. And that is gaining a lot of traction worldwide. I mean, Germany is ground zero for that at the moment. When they showed the map, there was saturation coverage of those farmers and others protests. There was overwhelming public support, north of 70%. You've got people like the Dutch, where the Farmers' Party has already taken power. They're adding into that. We've got sympathetic countries who are either going to stage their own protest or add in. Poland and Hungary are good examples. Even Austria, which is pretty woke, they're joining in to some extent. We've had now conservative governments in Italy and Greece. We've had that wonderful victory for Libertarian Party in Argentina. In fact, the Davos crowd had finished their meeting and they didn't mention the next global pandemic X or World War III or runaway global boiling or whatever. They simply mentioned misinformation, and disinformation is the biggest issue for them going forward. Well, why would that be? The simple statistic is that in the next 18 months to 2 years, approximately 3 billion people, that's approximately half of the world's population, will be voting in elections. And people are starting to wake up. And what we're doing here in Australia is way behind the 8 ball. I mean, New Zealand are way ahead of us because they've had Conservative government put in, and curse their luck for that. But let's make 2024 the year that we start our pushback. And one of the significant things will be this rally on the 6th. So if I can later on, through Deborah, organise some way in which we can all participate if we have the time and opportunity. You know, that is the biggest thing. They don't want people waking up to the narrative and not believing the science because it's costing them too much. It's ruining their livelihoods. It's ruining the economies. It's destroying the countryside. And it won't take people long to jack up here either. Once you realise that the 3 key elements are going to be destroyed by this, and that is energy security, you know, close 1 or 2 more coal-fired power stations, and literally that's it, folks. Food security, you start taking up to, and I've seen an estimate that it will involve up to 1/3 of prime arable food growing areas of Australia get eaten up by these absolutely ridiculous monstrosities. And ultimately national security. And we know that a lot of the parts are made in China, and we know that we are weakening our own security by our reliance and dependence on these things. Now, I'd like to commence by introducing my good friend, Rafe Champion, who's been accompanying me on the last day or so and will accompany me in the next couple. But in addition to that, Rafe is really a pioneer when it comes to energy realism. In fact, he started an ad hoc group known as the Energy Realists of Australia. That's as I first got to hear about Rolf, and we first met in a coffee shop in Double Bay on that basis. And he had a thing called the National Information Network, where he went out to a large database of both political and media with his information. And so he's very well credentialed to talk about this. He's written a lot of articles that appear in items like The Spectator and Quadrant magazine and other things. He's also a noted author, and he's written, and I'll let him tell you about his book on trigger warming, everything you wanted to know but were afraid to ask. And in addition, one of his key strengths makes him an interesting hybrid is he's very interested in the philosophy of science and the work particularly of Karl Popper. Now, Karl Popper was a noted Austrian philosopher who espoused the doctrine of falsifiability of evidence. So if you want to use the scientific method correctly, you have to subject yourself to that sort of test. Now, we know our opposition literally, quote unquote, just make it up. Any old thing will do. It's lie, cheat and steal on their behalf. And I'll be informing you of how things are going with the climate trial of the century at the moment that's happening between Michael Hockey Stick Man and our wonderful Mark Stein, who I'd love to have as a guest one time on Zoom for us. He's a real charmer, this guy. So I'd like, without further ado, if you could give a warm round of applause for Rafe Temple.
Okay, fine. So since Neil mentioned my books, I thought I'd actually better show them to you. Three of them anyway. So the book on climate and energy that he mentioned was Trigger Warming, written. I launched the project, and then Jeff Grimshaw came to do the heavy lifting in the science. In the course of writing this book, I realised, which I thought was going to be a short primer for people I don't have to read a whole shelf of books by Ian Plimer and others, supposed to be all in this thin volume. But then I realised that midway through, the climate debate was gone in the public. It was too hard. But what would get the public in would be the energy side of it, because soon the public is going to be very concerned about energy and their rights and their cost. The point is you can't talk about the climate science in public because people don't have enough science. But they can understand the basics of what's going on with the energy system. You just need to explain the phenomenon of wind droughts, and you need to explain that we don't have anything in the way of grid-scale storage. And so it was a total monumental mistake to ever allow subsidised and mandated unreliable energy into the grid. It's never been allowed on. And so the first part of my talk will just basically rehearse what I call the ABC of energy, and then proceed to a little bit more facts about actual phenomenal wind droughts and how much storage you need and how much storage we've got. But just to finish the book story, okay, there's this one on climate. There's this one, which is written by my wife, although I got to be the co-author. It's her experience through the 10 years of the Cultural Revolution. Amazing book. And she actually died 2 months ago. So I'm still grieving in ways. I've been going for a fair while. Wonderful person, wonderful book. And this is a collection of my papers, essays and book reviews written through the 1990s into the just a collection of stuff, but some of it's about science and the triumph of Australian rural research. Wonderful track record of agricultural innovation based on the universities and the CSIRO when they were the world's leaders, and now the CSIRO has been taken over, and the universities have been taken over by content-free managers. Like they got no content, they just manage, and they have political agendas. And the result is to travesties like GenCost study on the cost and their hand-in-glove cooperation with the energy market operator and their absurd integrated system plans. Nonsensical plans. That makes no sense. But some of my energy realist colleagues are working on that.
Also, arrangements and tough budget for the expense.
Well, it's about getting the next grant. But having got to a point of some understanding, I realised the need for concerted efforts and activity in PR and education. So I recruited the efforts of some engineers and others, and we wrote a series of briefing notes and sent to all the politicians in the country and they're all on the website, so you can read the notes, and I'll get Neil to circulate the site so you can have a look at it. And the next evolution was to think about a information network to get around and past mainstream media that don't tell people anything that they need to know. And the idea of this is to a massive email list where the key distribution points will be people like the good small party candidates, because they've all got networks. They're all building their local networks for electioneering. So, and just as of this morning, we seem to have recruited Advance Australia, which is 300,000 people. So the idea is to get bite-sized chunks of information, drawing off the reservoir of stuff in our briefing notes, and get this information flowing out through this network. You think of it like the energy grid. Okay, the power stations generate power, it goes out through the grid. We generate information, and it goes out through our network. And we break out of our bubble, the bubble where we sit around in little groups and talk about stuff. Nobody takes any notice. We're going to burst the bubble and move out, because we can explain energy things in the way that we can't explain climate things so well. Okay, now to the talk. We're talking about the ABC of energy generation. That's the ABC. And the next step is to accept or know about the reality of wind droughts.
Let's hope that page down works.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't. All right. That'd be just too easy, wouldn't it?
There it is. Scrolling.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a display from the wonderful NemWatch widget. It's produced by our mortal enemies, the Renew Economy Group. And these bars indicate the amount of energy being produced in each state, and it's live. It gets updated every 5 minutes. So you look at that, and if you're at WindWatcher, you go looking for green, because the green parts of the bars is wind. Now, coal is black and brown, gas is red, hydro is blue, and green is wind. And on that particular occasion, say evening around dinner time, the wind was contributing about 3% of the power that people wanted to cook their dinner and run their air conditioners and their heaters and everything else. So the wind and sun enthusiasts are really excited about the increasing generation, which is up to 40% on average. But we have to explain it's not about averages, it's about minute by minute. So the average production from a windmill over a year is 30%. But what counts is what is producing that hour, that minute, that day. And so you need to be attuned to the lowest level of supply. It's like a flood levee. A flood levee which is uneven in height. What counts is the lowest bit, because the water gets in at the lowest point. Okay, it doesn't matter about the high point, and it doesn't matter about the average. When the water gets in,
Working backwards here.
So if the water gets through the flood levee at the lowest point of the levee, and the wind droughts are the lowest point of that wavy line. And the line across is 10%, which is a line that I draw arbitrarily to define a wind drought. So we've got a wind drought when it's less than 10% of the capacity of the system. And it can get down as far as 1%. Now, the reason we have to take some effort to explain wind droughts to people is that pretty well everyone assumes that the wind's always blowing somewhere not far away. Now, everyone knows that the wind's sometimes not blowing, but you have to explain that sometimes it's not blowing over the whole of southeastern Australia. And then you're in trouble if you are depending on wind. Now, until very recently, it didn't really matter what the wind and the sun did. because we had an adequate supply of coal power, mostly coal power, until Hazelwood closed. And when Hazelwood closed, the sensible management of AEMO at that stage says, hey guys, we're in trouble, we've got no buffering, we've got no spare capacity. That was about the time that AEMO was taken over by an American politician who filled it up with systems analysts and AI specialists and people who played with algorithms, and she turned it green, and AEMO is producing nothing of value in the way of planning documents since that time. We're lucky that they got competent engineers, so they had to keep the power going by doing things like heroic load shedding and too much of the system. But you can't trust their planning documents, and we have to explain to people that points, low points, which can extend up to 2017, a period of 3 days. This was June 2020, when there was multiple occasions of prolonged wind drought. The longest was 35 hours on the 5th to the 8th. And more recently, in August 2022, there was a period of 2 wind droughts in successive nights. Now, when you're talking about storage, the killer is when there's a drain in successive that persists. And so the next thing to talk about is, okay, you got the idea of the wind droughts, you've got the idea that they can extend across the whole of the subcontinent. And when the coal supply runs down, and this is the next chart. Yeah, so, yes. Starting there in the year 2000, we had probably 30 gigawatts of coal capacity. Come to 2023 and we're down to 22. And there's a sort of barely distinct line going across the page. That's demand. Now, of course, the demand varies through the day and season, but the tendency is there, obviously there. As you run down your coal, you eventually get to a point where it meets the demand. And when you get to that point, when you go past that point, and you don't have some wind and solar input, the lights flicker. So in other words, you didn't need to worry about wind and sun until we got to this tipping point, and now they've suddenly become necessary, or the lights are going to flicker. And it doesn't help building more capacity. You build as much capacity as you like, but if there's no wind, it still doesn't generate any power. The same applies to solar fields. But I'm not concerned about the sun. There's always a bit of solar even if it's overcast. For me, the killer thing is the windless nights. It's all about windless nights. And I've done a calculation to work out how much storage, see, we're pushing that about time. I think the storage required to get through a windless night without coal. Well, you can think about a demand through the night of about 20 gigawatts, and we'll allow, let's say, allow 4 gigawatts of hydro, which is much more than usual, but this is an emergency, okay, so we'll run hydro flat out. You can't do it for long or the dams will drain. And so you run your hydro and you have a bit of wind, 10% of the capacity, that's say 10 gigawatts. But the calculation that emerges is the demand for power to get through like 14 hours of darkness in winter, 14 hours of 20 gigawatts of demand, 2,800 gigawatt hours. Supply from hydro, 56, supply from wind, 14, total 70, and the shortfall is 210 gigawatt hours. 210 gigawatt hours. Now let's look at the amount of storage that's under construction as of January. I last looked at the survey. And at that time, looking at the whole pipeline of battery projects, there was almost 60 gigawatt hours in that pipeline, which is some way short of 210. Now, on the ground and working, there's 2.8 gigawatt hours of capacity of batteries on the ground. It's just too funny for words. Yesterday we read that a battery is going to open up at Morte Lake in Victoria. It's going to have 500 gigawatt hours of supply. No, sorry, megawatt hours. No, megawatt hours. Never mind. The bottom line is it's a teaspoonful of power. It just doesn't count towards getting through a windless night. And it also costs 600 megawatt hours. And also this capacity, it's cost over $600,000 for a megawatt hour of storage. When you start talking about gigawatts and the number of dollars required is astronomical. That's a silly joke. They talk about providing these batteries to get people through the peak hour at dinner time, but there's still the whole night to get through. They just forget about that as though that's not there. So I'll just briefly mention pumped hydro because that's the other thing you might use for storage. But Snowy 2 will probably never get built. If it does get built, it will provide a trickle of power for 7 days before it has to be recharged. And when you get a trickle of power for 7 days, okay, but there's 365 days in the year. So come on. Nowhere in the world is there a large pumped hydro scheme which is pumped with wind and sun. The biggest one at Bath in Philadelphia, US, 3 or 4 gigawatts, and it's pumped entirely by coal and nuclear power. And as you understand, those plants can pump continuously at probably 95% day and night. When the demand in the grid falls away, they pump water to the Bath pumped hydro. So everyone's happy. They get a bit of power from the water, which is pumped with excess coal and nuclear power. So the end result is that we have a massive demand for storage, which can't possibly be met with any conceivable or feasible technology that is in sight. And this has come about because the meteorologists never told us about wind droughts. Fancy that. They'll tell you about every type of extreme weather, but there's never a warning about wind droughts. And consequently, we've got stuck with arguably the most catastrophic policy blunder in peacetime history, because we're not that far away from the destruction of our power system. Not that far away. You just need to close down some more coal stations, which all of the usual suspects are still determined to do. And come the windless nights, lights go out. And when the power goes off in a big city, within a day there's no water, immediately there's no water and gas and no sewage. In a couple of days there's no food. You're looking at a job unprecedented. You've got to think about nuclear war as a comparable catastrophe. So we have to explain this in clear, distinct terms with nice pictures, just to build public awareness and and motivate people to just go into their local member and start banging the table and say, what's going on here? And particularly in the run-up to elections, you have to ask all the candidates, what are you going to do about this power situation? So it actually starts now in Queensland, but you guys have got the next election coming up. So all of our PR and everything we want to do can get a test run in Queensland going forward towards the next election.
Something you might find briefly that Rafe was wrote a letter to the head of the Queensland Police. He noted this probably recently after hearing him speak at the public function, say he's not prepared to enter into the energy question during the election. He's not prepared to discuss the prospect of energy products. He's ruled it out. He's got 14 points: housing, public health, care, law enforcement, something else. He's ruled out the question of energy products. Like written to him.
Well,
I raised it the last Southport.
It might help to repeat what a person says, because the people can't hear what's being said. I'm experimenting here, but I don't want to interrupt the meeting. But it may be possible to use that microphone, and I could give you the tablet, and you can actually talk into the microphone, and then everybody in the meeting can hear you. And I'm not really sure that works yet. So.
yeah, I'm ready to move to that stage of proceedings. So I'm ready for question at Q&A.
Right.
I've said what I need to say.
Okay.
Okay, so now let's work out how to do Q&A.
Yeah, well, the audience up there can't hear what I'm saying, most likely.
Oh, I see.
And so it's necessary for you to repeat what
I get
Andrew
it.
said, and then answer the question.
Okay, well, I've just given a reply to a man who said that the leader of the Liberal Party in Queensland has decided not to enter into the energy debate going forward to the election. Okay, you got it right with housing. I put housing and power together, but this guy, your fearless Liberal or Liberal, whatever leader, David Christofouli, doesn't want to be talking about energy. Well, someone's going to have to talk sharply to him and his troops.
He's going to end up with his pants down around his knees if someone asks him a few pertinent questions.
I was asked by the member of the party, Sam, not to badger him being through it.
And I've just told that the member for Bonnie has asked our friend
Andrew
Toga not to badger him.
I've been accused of badgering.
He's been charged for that's a form of harassment. Next question.
Can I add something here, which just might be interesting? I don't know whether they can hear me, but the average household uses 1.5 kilowatt hours per hour. And to charge an electric vehicle on a slow charge takes 157 kilowatt hours, and a fast charge 250 kilowatts. So how are we going to charge all our electric vehicles?
Well, they'll subsidise fast chargers, I suppose.
Where's the electricity going to come from?
Oh, well,
we can barely cover our houses.
Good evening, Andrew Kogar. I just wanted to give you a perspective of the sort of problems we are up against in Queensland with regard to the state government's renewable energy networks that are in place at the moment. A recent document from the State Department of Renewable Energy and Economy Jobs, it's called. That's the name of the department. They have a network called Copper Spring, which is their massive transmission line network that they're putting in place at the moment. And they've employed 450 businesses under contract to make that happen, connecting the proposed 90 plus wind farms and solar farms proposed for the state. So that's the sort of state government impetus, or that's what's happening that we're pushing back against in the state of Queensland at the present time, just to give you a perspective of how much work we've got to do to win the battle here in Queensland. So that's just something I thought I would input.
I've got a question for you. Rafe, David Denham here. I originally saw a short 7-minute interview with a whistleblower called Alex Nichol, who worked for the Energy Department in Canberra, started with Johnny Howard, worked through the Rudd era. And her perspective of it was that because a coal-fired power station and a gas-fired power station, for that matter, takes about 24 hours to get up to peak capacity, that they never actually turn them down. They would have it operating somewhere around about 85%. And in Queensland, the rate is not 30%. If you look at the wind gauge right down through the highlands of Queensland, it's somewhere around about 22% efficiency in Queensland from wind turbines. And what she was saying, what they actually do is they'll run the coal-fired capacity at pretty much near capacity, and if all it does is provides electricity to turn the blades of the wind power turbine so they look good. And as the wind kicks in and they get some wind and it starts generating power, because it can go both ways, all they do is evacuate steam from the coal-fired power station. So the wind turbines actually are never, ever, ever producing power that we will actually use. Is that your understanding, and is that still happening today?
I think say that's not my understanding. I know that they.
You want to?
I know, at least I'm assured by the people who watch the wind really thoroughly, that the capacity factor the average capacity factor for our wind fleet is 30%. That's the average. Now, there are industry claims of 38%. There's claims that they're going to do better than 40% going forward. We'll believe that when we see it, but I'm prepared to accept that this is across the nation. And until recently, there were only maybe 2 or 3 wind farms in Queensland. Queensland is way behind with wind farms. They've got up to 5. I think I must have started 2 or 3. 5 now. And I think, well, I just can't believe that. I can't believe it. But anyway, the point is, getting back to production, I know the people who look at Mount Emerald minutely have found less than 20%. So individual farms, for particular factories, can be very low. But I am surprised. I mean, if you got any amount of wind, you do get some power. You've got to get the wind has to reach a minimum speed of maybe 4 metres per second before any power is generated. But above that, it does generate. They do generate power, and it's a squared factor. So the amount of power increases rapidly as the wind speed increases, until at some point they've got to turn them off or they'll fly apart. But that's a very bold claim to say that they were being turned by power from the grid. Now, I know that Paul Miskelly, who did the first study of the fleet back in the year of data in 2010, and he said that there were occasions where, in particular, when the wind was very low, they were indeed drawing power from the grid, not so much because that's to stop the bearings getting distorted, and also to support on-board electronic equipment. So if there's no power being generated, they do suck power out of the grid partly to keep the wind, not so much to look good, but to stop the bearings getting distorted by sitting still in the one position.
The point she was making is the electricity that they were generating, which is such a poor quality, the wrong frequency, wrong intensity, that had to be inverted up to be actually used, that it was cheaper for them to keep the coal-fired power stations, keep them up around 80-85%, so they could draw on the power. You can't get a coal-fired power station up to steam in 1 hour just because you've suddenly got a drought. It takes half a day to get the thing up to full power. And the gas is exactly the same, because you have the first phase gas is only 30% where it's a jet engine, and it only gets up to 65% when it's created steam, but it's exactly the same thing. You just don't get it up to steam. So what she said to me actually made sense.
Well, that's,
And she was in the industry for 7 years, and she said this was the practice. You keep them up to power, and if the wind turbines are generating power, all they do is eject steam.
yeah, well, the ultimate failure is the wind drought issue. I mean, that will kill the system stone dead. And that's confronts us as they run down coal to a point where it isn't. If we don't have enough conventional power, which is overwhelmingly coal, to meet 100% of demand, we're going to be in trouble.
Yeah.
Hydro, and there's no scope to expand conventional hydro. There's no more reason to do that with. Pumped hydro is just a silly joke, as are batteries. The whole wind and solar system is a silly joke on grid. Do it where it works off grid. Don't subsidise it. Let people decide if they want to have their batteries and panels. Certainly there's a place for it off grid here and there. But we're back to the disaster of subsidised and mandated. And the energy is going to get more expensive, going to get less reliable, it's going to do massive environmental damage, and we're spending, and worldwide, trillions of dollars are being spent to generate more expensive, less reliable and destructive energy. I mean, you just couldn't actually make it up in a nightmare.
Yeah, I actually do a lot of work in Vanuatu, and they don't even try to use wind power at all. They've had a good look at it, absolutely useless. So all they do is all the houses have the solar panels on the roof, which actually they get very good ones from South Africa, and they're half the price of the ones we buy. And they have a whole room full of batteries where they can draw a bit at night. Plus, they have a generator which they'll run on diesel. But they'll use what they can during the day. They'll get what they can from the batteries. Usually, just run LED lights and the TV and stuff like that. They don't do much in aircon actually in Vanuatu. They get good breeze, and the temperatures, the night temperatures are quite cool. But they had a look at wind and totally rejected it.
Right. Yeah, I've looked at a few islands like King Island. There's a lot of money there, and it still runs on half diesel. Same with Rottnest, Flinders, any other island I've looked at. No, I mean, the more you learn about it, the more stupid it is.
It's ridiculous.
You think it's as stupid as it could be, then it's more stupid than that.
No.
Let's have Brian then.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to do a short intro for Brian.
Yeah.
You all have a chance to get to know Brian, to get to know Rafe over dinner, drinks, network with him. He knows heaps of people. He's going to provide really good advice and support to everyone. And he's going to grow his own network up here at the same time. This will be a mutual win-win situation. So it's wonderful having you on board. All right. So I want to give some time down south Victoria, because this is the other side of the coin. If we know how bad all these renewable projects will be, how costly and inefficient they'll be, then obviously somebody's got to worry about what really works, and that is good old coal and oil and gas, the so-called demonised fossil fuels that we must transition away from. Well, that's utter nonsense. Coal is a big export earner, major industry in Australia. This government in particular realises it can't simply get rid of that sort of money. That is the only thing saving the budget. So, Brian, I want to introduce my knowledge. Is simply one of reading his profile a little bit. He started his career as a diplomat. He had postings in countries like Sri Lanka and Germany. And following that career, he started a second career in the area of publications and reports. So this isn't publications per se or writing on the topic so much as industry-specific publication. And the first area he was involved in was building and construction projects, mostly from Southeast Asia, and sometimes from Australia. So he worked in that area. I noticed that the big publications house, Thomson's, that I used to consult to at one stage, they were one who took over one of Brian's companies. The second thing he did is graduate from there in about 2005 to those sort of industry reports on mining and energy sector. So he has a lot in common with Andrew in that regard. He's been doing that for a considerable period of time, and since 2021, he's been doing it under his own banner, known as the Energy Bureau. So that'll also become part of our extended network. He has a lot of contacts in Victoria. This is a small beginning. I've just been speaking at length with Helen Dyer from West Australia, and she's right on board. We are going to grow this thing, even if we've got growing pains. Because, you know, this is identifying the people who can make contacts and connections. And so Brian is essential cog in that wheel, as I see it. Only on the weekend, if most of you got the weekly report, you would have read this incredible document that they're asking for comments on, your comments, your feedback. You know, David, I'd like you to take umbrage at them on behalf and show us all the way on that one. The language was, we are undergoing a necessary transition to reliable, quote unquote, secure, quote unquote, and affordable, quote unquote, energy. Okay. What utter rubbish. And I could think of no better person to address the issue of the future of coal and just how important it is now, will continue to be for decades to come. Brian, I'd like us to give you a warm round of applause as we hear from you.
Well, thank you for that kind introduction. And I've prepared something brief. I don't think I'm as fluent as the other speakers and just speaking ad lib. And I will cut it down because I know we've been going some time and people have drinks, dinner, etc. to go to. I'll come to the position where coal has a good chance of winning simply by default because other things aren't going to work. Rafe has gone through, starting with renewables in a very thorough way. I'd like to add two things on renewables. First of all, Stephen Wilson of the University of Queensland makes the interesting point that the owners of wind and solar farms aren't first and foremost selling electricity, they're first and foremost selling certificates. Certificates which retailers and others are obliged by the government to purchase and as a way of encouraging renewable energy. And consider the situation, he points to the situation, uses this as an illustration. Consider the situation in the middle of the day when there's a lot of wind and sun, there's excess electricity in the grid, prices turn negative. Now that's obviously a very dangerous situation for coal-fired power plants, but it's not so for wind and solar farms. Why? Because while a wind or solar farm may face a negative price, let's call it -10, whatever unit, it may also be selling certificates that for a sale price of say 15 units. So the net gain's 5 units. And you might call, say, it's a nice little earner, which is only made possible by government support. And the result is that wind and solar, they can't produce baseload electricity, but they face no financial penalty for not doing so. In fact, they are financially rewarded. The second point on renewables I was wanting to make is that just looking at internationally, if renewables are important because of concerns about global warming, then obviously it's a global issue. The problem is it's very difficult to get developing, or a lot of developing countries on side. And we in the West, or in developed countries, have spent the past 100 years using coal for our own benefits. And we're now telling developing countries that that's not a good thing to do. They should not use coal or even natural gas. The problem is that given that electricity is such a fundamental part of the growth of any economy, developing countries, and looking at Asia particularly, where most developing countries find coal the most cost-effective way of electricity generation, that they are way behind the developed world still in electricity generation. Now, one measure of this is to look at electricity generation, annual electricity consumption per capita. Now, this can be measured in watt hours. Let me give you a figure. Taking a few developed countries, the figures say 8 for Japan. Now that means 8 watt hours per capita is consumed. Australia, the figure's 10. The figure for United States is 13. The developed countries as a whole, roughly from 8 through to 16. For developing countries, for a lot of them, it's much lower. So for Thailand, for example, it's 2. For Indonesia and India, it's a little over 1. It's under 1 for Pakistan and Bangladesh. And it's not much above 0 for, say, Nigeria or the Democratic Republic of the Congo. In other words, developing countries have a long way to catch up and don't want to put barriers in the way of doing so. And there's no hope of a global agreement on climate issues if that continues to be the case. That's my guess. Renewables, nuclear power, let me turn that to briefly. We all know there's a growing interest in nuclear power, accompanied by changes in technology making this source of electricity increasingly attractive. It's seen rather dramatically in the increase in over the last 5 years, 6 years in uranium prices, which in terms of measured per pound uranium dioxide or yellow cake have gone from $25 in mid-2017 to $50 in mid-2023, and they now stand at over $100. It's been a dramatic increase. And but having said that, in Australia, it's hard to see the first nuclear plant in Australia before the mid-30s, and that probably requires the Liberal government winning the next election. And it is unlikely, unless there was a real campaign, that nuclear power would be a major force before, say, 2050s. Something else is needed in the meantime. Now, some, of course, believe that something else is natural gas, which is favoured by some as a so-called transition fuel to a future of renewables. In my view, the optimism on natural gas is is unrealistic. First of all, natural gas is in short supply in the eastern states. And this situation has been worsened by the government's decision in late 2022 to put a cap on natural gas prices. This has particularly encouraged investment in new supplies. The American economist Milton Friedman put it quite graphically in the 1970s, following the oil crisis of that decade. He said, "We economists don't know much, but we do know how to create a shortage. If you want to create a shortage of tomatoes, for example, just pass a law that retailers can't sell tomatoes for more than 2 cents per pound. Instantly, you'll have a tomato shortage, which is the same with oil or gas." In Australia, the situation is likely to improve over the next few years. Santos's Narrabri project is expected to commence, if confirmed, by 2027. Santos says it could produce up to half of New South Wales' natural gas needs. The Beetaloo Basin in the Northern Territory is considered a promising potential supply of natural gas, possibly from the mid to late 2020s. However, gas from these sources is unlikely to compete economically with coal for electricity generation. That's been Australia's experience since the beginning. Natural gas here, unlike the United States, is not competitive with coal. Now, of course, that can change if there were spectacular finds of natural gas, but at the moment, that's the best bet. The journalist Robert Gottliebson, an Australian, has written very forcefully on the enormous potential of gas in Gippsland, in Victoria, but as you know, exploration for natural gas and production of natural gas is currently effectively banned by the state government. So I think the outlook for gas is, I think it takes a brave person to say that natural gas is going to step in and be an effective replacement for or effective source of renewable baseload electricity. So in short, renewables are not working. Nuclear power is some way off. Natural gas is in short supply, particularly in the eastern states, and in any case is likely to be much more expensive than coal. This leaves coal as the only option in certainly let's say the next 10 years, and probably a lot longer, given the time it'll take the nuclear, if it happens, to have a significant impact. The conclusion I draw is that, let me just say what are political parties doing at the moment, the major parties. Here's a brief and perhaps unfair summary. Labor remains committed to renewables, opposed to nuclear power and opposed to coal. The Liberals are embracing nuclear power. They cannot make up their mind on coal, and the word is barely mentioned by senior Liberals. And renewables, well, they're still clinging to the target of net zero emissions. My guess is that the parties cannot continue down these paths indefinitely, and there's at least a reasonable chance in 2024 they're going to have to rethink the issue. And there are several potential sources of change. For example, continuing high electricity prices and or blackouts would have a significant effect on the population as a whole. The continuing opposition to wind and solar farms and associated transmission lines is likely to force delays and in some cases cancellations of new developments, and thus very much getting in the way of the government's ambitious plans for renewables. The evidence that the public is not as wedded to renewables and against coal as is common. Let me rephrase that. Another development which would get in the way of or would favour coal is to learn that the public is not as wedded to renewables and is not as opposed to coal as is commonly thought. And that is a realistic outcome, in my view, if electricity prices continue to increase, and particularly if there are blackouts. The other thing which lies at the base of all this, and is barely mentioned, but developments in climate science, which if there are developments which cast doubt on the view that greenhouse gases are the main driver of climate change, would have a serious effect also. Now, I can't forecast whether these sort of developments will lead to meaningful change, but they do give such confidence that such change is possible. And just as a parting comment, I was amused recently to read that the former British Prime Minister, Harold Macmillan, was once asked by Lamara, what is the most difficult part of being a Prime Minister? And in his rather languid, aristocratic way, Mr. Macmillan replied, events, dear chap, events. And I think political parties in Australia are faced with this problem in regard to energy policy. Okay, that's enough for me.
Thank you.
Good evening, Brian, and thank you very much for an excellent presentation. That was marvellous. Do we have some questions from the audience? Of course. Dr. Ross, do you have a question?
No, how to say, market is full with numbers. I'm deeply impressed by these beautiful presentations. It shows very professional, very civil approach to the current problem regarding ensuring, sufficient energy to Queensland and the problems from professional, also from political point of view. I got many ideas which will direct my, thinking over the next couple of weeks. Maybe I can share some emails. I think that we shouldn't make big concern regarding energy sources. Australia is a huge continent. There are no many possible engineering solutions. I read the paper that in USA they started developing wave turbines for getting energy from the ocean. We should be a little bit more optimistic, but like such a division that one political decision we focus only on renewable energy, the other political position is that we could explore nuclear energy. There should be some kind of compromise, because we're talking about the national interest. Thank you very much. Excellent meeting. I got very good mood. You made my day. Thank you very much.
Brian, where are you?
Yes. Can you see me?
Yeah, loved your talk. Fantastic.
Thank you.
I'm wondering what your opinion is on the possibility of taking more of the plant with people like within the LNP to attack the renewables more from the environmental impact side rather than the all the more probably what are they, acute or obtuse angles of cost and things like that would pass over people's head. But the one thing that we've been noticing recently, and I've been writing sort of articles with things like Clark Creek 1 and 2, which has actually been approved, and in their prospectus, the workers are told to carry blunt instruments to euthanize cows as they fall out of trees, things like that, plus all the apex predator birds that are going to be affected in right up and down the mountain ranges of Queensland. If we get these 90 wind farms in, sorry, and then you've got all the multiple deaths of the bats and things like that. My opinion is if we can get that sort of stuff before the public, there'll be such an outcry over particularly the wind turbines that the whole renewable thing could bring it down like a pack of cards. Have you had any experience of that in Victoria, or are you getting?
Yes, and I don't feel fully that competent to answer it. But first of all, looking beyond Victoria, it's something that Cater writes about quite a lot. It's also, I've noticed that, Robben Island just off the coast of Tasmania, which is the proposed place of a very large wind development. Apparently the wind there is spectacular. And, former Greens leader Bob Brown is leading the charge against it, partly on environmental grounds and partly on the famous orange-bellied parrot, which turned up in Victoria some years ago, and another bird. I noticed in New South Wales, of course, with offshore wind farms, the highly, I suppose, emotional issue of whales appears to be playing quite a big part, because the whales, as I understand it, migrate up the coast at a distance of maybe less than 50 kilometres from the coast, and wind farms will get in their way. In Victoria, as you'd know, there's a major offshore wind farm is called as the Star of the Sea, I think, off Gippsland. And there are certainly people starting to roll up their sleeves in protest against that. So I think, and just speaking as a layman in this area, I think it's a really powerful area, or potentially powerful area, because it touches issues which a lot of people feel concerned about. Deep in their hearts, whether it's the orange-bellied parrot, or whether it's koalas, or whether it's, trees, or there's a whole lot of things which are more exciting to a lot of people than the statistics or the hard figures on energy prices or other things we've been talking about tonight.
Yeah, quite a few of us have joined the LNP in southeast Queensland to try and make changes from within, because there's no thirst within the LNP to tackle the science or being more obvious.
Yeah,
What we're trying to do is push them to attack the environmental impact, and at least it's something they can get their teeth into. And I honestly think they might win votes from the Greens, not the Green Party, but
green people like Bob Brown. I see the sense of what you're doing. I mean, I saw it about coal. Let's push coal. That maybe politically the best way is to start pushing renewables first. And if people really get concerned about renewables on environmental grounds, that encourages them to think, okay, this is not looking good. So what do we use? Renewables don't look as good as they're supposed to. Do we go to gas? Do we go to coal? Do we nuclear? And then it forces people to look at the genuine baseload options for electricity.
Well, if we can get more conservative government into Australia, either through the states and certainly federally, we've possibly got a chance of redressing some of this.
Yeah. Well, here's a wild thought. There have been just the odd suggestions in the press that there are harder heads in the Labor Party who are not happy the way Labor energy policy is going. And if such hard heads this year, if their position strengthened by increasing prices, perhaps blackouts, protests, tractors going down Pitt Street or Collins Street, all those sort of things, the Labor Party might turn around. Now, the Prime Minister's shown great flexibility in turning around on a great number of things. And it would be very interesting to see. The first casualty, I assume, would be Mr. Bowen. And I don't see it as impossible. I think it's unlikely, but not impossible that Labor would turn around. If they adopted, at least if they said, all right, we're happy to look at nuclear power, the Liberals are in a difficult situation, because then Labor and Liberal become not much different. The big thing going for the Liberals at the moment is nuclear power. They've come out in favour of it.
But the way they can attack it is they can say, look, our end game to get to net zero is nuclear. It will take a few years. We'll have to put up with coal for the time. Because the environmental impact of renewables is so appalling, so vote destroying, that they'll actually back away from it.
Yeah, politically they say, yes, it's a dreadful pity. It's like facing up to vinegar for breakfast, but you've got to have it because renewables are so bad. But with net zero, electricity is only, let's say, 1/3 of Australia's greenhouse gas emissions.
Yes.
And if the Liberals really want net zero, they've got to ban jet fuel and diesel and petrol, and they've got to do something about burping cows. Now, that's not going to happen under the Liberal Party. They're kidding themselves.
Once you open this Pandora's box, though, and then you start promoting that we actually only add now only 1% the CO2 of the world, mankind's CO2, then all of a sudden it doesn't become an issue anymore. One eighth of the population of the planet is involved in trying to do something about emissions.
But politically, that's not working, is it? Whereas what you're saying about environmental aspects of renewables is politically, sounds like a potentially powerful argument.
Well, I mean, you've got
people on board who may not agree that coal's a pretty thing, but certainly don't like renewables.
But you've got Qualier in Canada, you've got the PVB in the Netherlands, and the AFD in Germany, Maloney, you've got Miele, you've got all of these people popping up all over the planet. And then, and God bless him, if we get Trump, he's going to cut all ties with the United Nations, and certainly the IPCC. So, I don't know, maybe the worm is turning.
Yes, I've got a sense it is, and you can be accused of being unduly optimistic, but I think there's been a real turn over the last few years. And I see protests against wind farms and solar farms against renewables is really a little bit a gathering storm. Well, as you probably know, there's a major group in central Victoria, and so broadly the Ballarat region. There are proposals for significant new transmission lines going from Melbourne to a point beyond Ballarat and then going north to the Riverina district of New South Wales. And transmission lines will go through all sorts of properties. And
You've got very powerful conservative groups like, you know, property rights and
well, there's a group called who probably
all of
they
those.
say we're not against renewable energy, we're just against you know, transmission lines and towers, and they
That, you know, the destruction. I mean, I was on a Zoom meeting with Bill Stenson and a few people a while back, and it was of a country town in, I forget which one, in New South Wales, and the damage that had been done to neighbours and to friendships.
yeah, that's a real problem. Yeah,
Town had been torn because some people took the dollar,
yeah,
and one guy who didn't would end up with 1,000 acres of solar panels 10 feet from his boundary,
yeah.
and stuff like that. And that used to be his best friend. They don't talk anymore.
Nasty problem.
So this,
And
plus,
that's happening in Victoria too, in central Victoria. Some people being persuaded by the money and others hanging.
well, those people are going to vote.
Mm.
And if the Liberal Party can grow a decent pair and start being sympathetic with these people, as well as looking at the environmental impact, I think they'd win a lot of hearts.
But the Liberal Party are going to have to, it's easy to probably join forces with them, but they're going to have to think a little more deeply too. Well, are we ditching our the target of net zero? Are we against renewables? If so, do we like coal? You know, Liberals are not prepared to think through these issues publicly.
No, but they just stop talking about net zero and start talking about talking about a future of nuclear. But, you know, coal, you know, and talk about how little CO2 we actually produce from Australia in terms of world emissions and so on. So just talk about the things that you can.
I think that's a very good point. But even that, you just get the sense, and I don't feel any expertise in this, but say federally, you get the sense that they're still scared. You know, they still don't think the public is sufficiently on the side of these sort of radical thoughts.
Yeah, no, they're pathetic, but we'll keep pushing them anyway.
Yes, well, I think what you suggest with the Queensland sounds terrific.
Anyway, thank you very much.
Andrew Kogar again. We had the pleasure at the last meeting of this group in November to have a member of Parliament, Colin Boyce, present to us. And he's the member for Flynn, which is central Queensland. That's an area he's very familiar with the coal industry. One of the things that he mentioned, which we discussed also, was the government taxing of the coal industry.
Big in Queensland.
A major threat to the viability of the coal industry, and
In Queensland, particularly,
but nationally. So in New South Wales, the state tax on coal is 8%. In Queensland, it's 40%. Now, these coal tax, the carbon tax on coal mines at the moment are, for example, Anglo-American Coal for 2023, together with Stanmore Coal. So Anglo Coal's got 5 mines, Stanmore's got 4. The 9 mines paid $1 billion in carbon tax credits. That's $100 million per mine for that fiscal year. So my question to Colin Boyce, the visiting speaker at the last presentation, was, we're going to get to the point where some of the lesser profitable mines are going to be profit neutral or unprofitable due to taxation. And in Queensland, that's a serious problem. So it's something which, if we get Conservative government in the future, they can address quickly and peg back. But to have 40%, well,
it depends on price, doesn't it? Above a certain price, it's 40%. 40% on the coal price.
Yes. So the other fiscal problem we've got at the moment, of course, is the inability of the coal manufacturers to chase all of the export market or particularly metallurgical coal, which is out there in the world. So if coal mines want to extend production, they have to go cap in hand to the Department of the Environment and ask permission to extend their CO2 emissions to 20 or $30 billion in coal exports. So we need to get past that in the future. But I just wanted to talk about that fiscal issue, which is a threat to the viability at the moment.
And what are the Liberals in Queensland saying about it?
The Liberals in Queensland are saying, on the one hand, we'd like to guarantee the future of the coal industry in the state for obvious reasons. The coal industry in the state employs 8% of the population, but the supply chain employs another 6 or 7%. So it's very significant in terms of the knock-on effect if the industry has a setback. The other thing that, unfortunately, the current head of the LNP says in Queensland is that he's not prepared to go to the election on the basis of talking about energy, as I mentioned once before, for fear that environmentalists who want to see a reduction in CO2 may vote the wrong way when he's trying to get into power. So we're trying to, by various means, convince him to change his point of view and push back against destruction of the environment as a means of reducing renewable energy spread in our rural areas.
Yeah, and if Liberal parties can't assemble the courage to stand out on this issue, they have no hope, in my view.
We need courage.
I think in the play Macbeth, Lady Macbeth says to her husband, "Screw your courage to the sticking place." And that's what we might say to Liberal parties.
It's good advice.
Yeah.
Very much.
Well, it looks like we'll be wrapping it up because there are no further questions. And Neil, would you like to? And by the way, thank you very, very much for being here tonight and for putting up with all of the experimentation. We're still perfecting this, and I think we've got a long way to go. But nevertheless, it's been a very good evening, and my sincere thanks to everybody who's been involved.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Brian, on the back of what you'll do in Victoria as we learn how to spread the word, I had a long discussion with Helen Dyer. She's just had an eye operation, so she isn't in a fit state really to tune in. She's totally on song with what we're doing. She has a large group that she operates from email contacts and online material, and we want to get our act even further into gear because we have a very interesting, we would say a blockbuster night on February the 26th, because we're getting Professor Valentina Zarkova, who is a world authority on the grand solar minimum, to give us an address. And again, Kevin was instrumental in making the initial contact, so all credit to him. And I won't necessarily disclose all of the things in the pipeline, but there's some exciting ones as well coming up. So I'm not sure if that's my own phone. I hope you all come back with us and get to the surf club. I'm told it's the same deal. Drinks and meal orders before 8, and I've got at least one table booked. It could be my own. But anyway, stop. And so we're going. It's great to see you all here anyway. You all are known to me and have a prominent role to play one way and another. Thank you all.